He was dying, and he knew it the way only a man who has spent his life close to death can know it. Not with panic, not with bargaining, but with a quiet settling, like sediment finding the bottom of still water. Daniel Mercer sat in the recliner beside the bedroom window on a gray February morning and watched the snow fall across the yard he had mowed 1,000 times, and he thought about all the things he had never said out loud. The oxygen tank beside his chair hissed softly. His hands, which had once disarmed explosives in the dark and carried wounded brothers across open ground, trembled slightly when he lifted his coffee mug. The doctors had given him 4 months. That had been 6 weeks ago. He was 53 years old. He was a former Navy SEAL. He was a husband and a father, and a man who had seen something beneath the Antarctic ice that had broken something fundamental inside him, and he had kept silent about it for 7 years out of fear and love and a soldier's obedience to orders that should never have been given. But he was dying now, and the dead have no secrets worth keeping. He reached forward and pressed record on the small camera his daughter Sarah had set up on the bookshelf, and he looked into the lens, and he began to speak. The phone had rung at 1:13 in the morning on a Tuesday in January of 2019. Not his regular phone, the secure line, kept in the back of the nightstand drawer, the one that had not vibrated in over 2 years. Daniel was asleep with Emily's head resting on his shoulder, and their son Noah, who was 6 years old and afraid of thunderstorms, tucked against his other side after crawling in some time past midnight. The vibration moved through the mattress like a tremor, and Daniel was awake before the second pulse, the way men trained for combat are always awake before the world announces itself. He slipped out carefully without waking either of them, and walked into the hallway in the dark and answered in a voice barely above a whisper. The man on the other end gave no name. He said Daniel was being activated under something called Directive Winter Glass, that he was to report to Peterson Air Force Base by 0600 hours with full Arctic deployment gear, and that the operation was classified above top secret. Then, before disconnecting, the man said something Daniel had spent 7 years trying to explain away. He said, "Bring your Bible, Commander, if you still believe in it." The line went dead. Daniel stood in the dark hallway and felt the silence of the house wrap around him like something he was only now understanding the value of, and he stood there longer than he should have before going to pack. He was in the closet pulling his duffel bag from the shelf when Emily appeared in the doorway. She did not turn on the light. She stood with her arms crossed over her chest and her dark hair loose around her shoulders and watched him pack with the particular stillness of a woman who had watched him pack for 11 deployments and had learned that questions rarely changed answers. She asked how long. He said he did not know. The way her face moved at those words, a small, controlled shift, like a door closing quietly, told him everything about what kind of love theirs had become across 19 years of this life. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed and watched him without speaking, and he felt her watching and could not look at her directly, because if he looked at her directly, he was not sure he would be able to finish packing. He was zipping the bag closed when Noah appeared in the doorway in his pajamas, squinting against the hallway light, one hand gripping the door frame. He looked at his father's bag on the floor, and his face understood before his words did. "Daddy, are you leaving again?" Daniel knelt down on one knee in front of his son and took the boy's face gently in both hands. Noah's cheeks were warm from sleep. His eyes were the same dark brown as Emily's, and they were very serious for a 6-year-old at 1:30 in the morning. "Just for work, buddy," Daniel said. Noah looked at him for a long moment with the uncanny directness that small children have before the world teaches them to look away from hard things. "Don't go where it's dark this time," he said quietly. Daniel went very still. "What do you mean?" Noah's small shoulders lifted in a half shrug. "Last time you came home, you were scared of the dark. I could tell. You left the bathroom light on every night."
Daniel stared at his son and felt something move through his chest that he had no name for. He pulled Noah against him and held him tightly and closed his eyes and pressed his face into the boy's hair and breathed him in, that particular smell of a child's warmth, shampoo and sleep, and held it in his lungs like something he was trying to keep. When he finally stood and shouldered his bag and walked to the front door, Emily was standing in the hallway. She had put on his old flannel shirt over her pajamas, the way she always did when she was cold or sad. She looked at him with steady eyes. She reached up and touched his face with one hand, just briefly, her palm against his jaw, and did not say anything. He covered her hand with his and held it there for 3 seconds. Then he walked out into the January dark and did not look back, because he knew that if he looked back, he would see her standing in the lit doorway watching him go, and he would not be able to make himself keep walking. Peterson Air Force Base was locked down in a way Daniel had not seen outside active combat zones. No unit insignias on anything, no names on anyone. MPs who carried themselves with the tight, careful movements of people who had been told enough to be afraid, but ordered not to show it. Inside Hangar 18, 6 other operators stood around a steel briefing table covered in satellite photographs and radar imaging printouts. Men from Marine Raider units, Naval, Special Warfare, Air Force Pararescue, men with enough combined experience to conduct small wars, and not one of them was speaking. The silence in that hangar had weight. The man leading the briefing introduced himself only as Caldwell. Gray suit, mid-60s, the eyes of someone who had spent a career making decisions that other men lived and died inside. He slid a satellite photograph across the table, showing a perfectly circular formation in the Antarctic ice shelf, too large, too precise, too geometric to be geological. He said a drilling team had detected a structure approximately 11,000 feet beneath the Ross ice shelf 3 weeks prior. Not formations, a structure, with hallways and geometries that did not correspond to any architectural tradition in recorded human history. He showed the radar scans. Then he showed the photograph that Daniel would carry in his mind for the rest of his life. A doorway carved from black stone beneath the ice, its arch covered with symbols that were not any known language, symbols that made the eye want to slide away from them, and above the doorway a darkness that the camera flash had not penetrated. Caldwell said the structure predated human civilization by approximately 34 million years. One operator laughed, the short, reflexive laugh of a mind rejecting what the ears have received. Caldwell did not smile. He said, "Yes, that is precisely the problem." The Antarctic cold was not weather, it was intention. It pressed against the body from every direction simultaneously, methodical and patient, as though the continent had been waiting and had all the time it needed. The team landed at a site that appeared on no public map, 80 miles from the nearest official station, and the first thing Daniel noticed was that the station doors were open, standing wide open in wind cold enough to kill an unprotected man in 6 minutes, swinging slightly on their hinges like the mouths of people who had died mid-sentence. Inside the first building, they found dinner still on the tables, coffee frozen solid in the mugs, a chess game abandoned with one player's hand still implied in the position of the pieces. The people here had not evacuated, they had run. The blood trails along the corridor floors confirmed it, long, dark, frozen lines leading toward the elevator bank, and on the wall beside the elevator, written in something red and unsteady, 3 words that Daniel read and read again without being able to stop reading them. "Do not go below." He stood before those words for a long moment and felt every trained, experienced, rational part of himself agree completely. Then he stepped onto the elevator with his team, because soldiers follow orders even when the orders are wrong, especially when the orders are wrong, and the doors closed and they descended.
The warmth began at the third level and increased with every floor, which was wrong in every way that physics could be wrong beneath 2 miles of Antarctic ice. By the sixth level, condensation dripped from the walls, and the air carried a smell that was ancient and organic and sweet in the specific way that very old decay is sweet. And the hallway beyond the elevator doors was carved black stone, not built but shaped, as though by something that did not think in right angles or straight lines. The carvings covered every surface, thousands of them. Human figures prostrating themselves before enormous winged entities descending from above, rendered with a precision and consistency that Daniel's mind kept trying to call religious art before correcting itself with the reminder that religious art required religion, and religion required humanity, and humanity had not existed when these walls were carved. One operator reached out and touched a figure, and immediately blood ran freely from his nose, and he stepped back with a sound that was not a word. Then the whispering began. It came from everywhere and nowhere, from the stone itself, a sound that was almost language, the way a half-remembered dream is almost memory. And Daniel stood completely still and felt with a cold separate from the Antarctic air that he was on the edge of understanding it, that some part of his mind below conscious thought was reaching toward it instinctively, and he pulled himself back by sheer force of will and kept moving, because the alternative was to stand there, listening, until there was nothing left of him that wanted to leave. The central chamber had no ceiling their lights could find. In its center stood a throne of black stone, and behind the throne, sealed within ice, so clear it appeared to be glass, was something that ended Daniel's certainty about the nature of the world he lived in. It was enormous, shaped broadly like a human body, but built to proportions no human body had ever occupied, too tall, too long in the limbs, its face hovering in that specific, terrible territory between beautiful and wrong. Its armor was gold and intricate. Its wings, folded behind it within the ice, were membrane and bone, translucent and vast. Nobody spoke. Then the thing inside the ice opened its eyes. Daniel had tried for 7 years to find language for what happened to him in that moment. It was not fear alone, though fear was present and total. It was recognition. The creature's recognition of humanity in the small figures standing before it, a recognition that contained something like the weary familiarity of a shepherd who has turned to find the same flock wandered to the same dangerous ground again across an incomprehensible span of time. The radios screamed static. Every light died simultaneously. And in the absolute darkness, from beneath the stone, and from the ice, and from the air itself, something began to breathe with the slow regularity of something that had been asleep for a very long time, and now, with great patience, decided to stop. The surviving scientists were 3 who had locked themselves in a sealed room deeper in the structure, starving, damaged in ways that went past the physical. One sat against the wall in continuous quiet prayer. Another had harmed himself in ways Daniel declined to describe. The lead researcher, Dr. Elaine Brooks, seized Daniel's arm the moment she saw his light and gripped it with a strength that seemed impossible for someone in her condition. She told him they had initially believed the structure was extraterrestrial, evidence of non-human intelligence visiting ancient Earth. Then she told him what had changed. The creature had communicated with the team, not through sound or device, but directly, in their own languages, in their specific dialects, using private memories and intimate details it had no possible access to. And the carvings throughout the structure showed a continuous record across all of human civilization, Sumer and Egypt and the Indus Valley and Mesoamerica and the biblical lands, with the same figures appearing in the same positions of authority across every culture and every era.
"We thought we were making a discovery," she said, and her voice was the voice of someone describing a wound. "We weren't. We were being observed. We have always been observed. Whatever we are, whatever human history actually is, it did not begin with us." She looked at Daniel with eyes that had already processed their grief and come out the other side into a kind of terrible calm. "We didn't discover it. It discovered us, thousands of years ago, and it never lost track of us after that." Only 3 of Daniel's team reached the extraction point. The storm outside had become something beyond weather, visibility at absolute zero, wind that struck the body like a physical attack. One operator walked into the white and did not come back, and no one who was there ever fully explained why they did not go after him, except to say that something in the way he walked suggested he had already made a decision. The helicopter came in low and fast and lifted them out, and as it banked away, Daniel looked down through the storm and saw, for just a moment, through a break in the weather, shapes moving beneath the ice, massive, slow, patient, moving with the unhurried certainty of things that had been waiting for a very long time, and have just now, for reasons of their own, decided to stop. When he came home, Emily was in the kitchen when he walked through the door, and she turned and looked at him, and he watched her face perform a rapid private calculation, taking in his eyes, his posture, the specific quality of his silence, and he saw the moment she understood that something had been lost that was not coming back.
She crossed the kitchen and put her arms around him and held on without speaking, and he stood with his arms at his sides for a moment before he brought them up and held her back, and she felt him shaking slightly, the fine tremor of a man holding something enormous very still, and she tightened her arms and did not ask him anything. That night, he lay in the dark beside her and could not close his eyes, and eventually got up and turned on the bathroom light and left it on. And from that night forward, he always left it on, and Emily never once asked him why. 6 months later, he went to church for the first time since Antarctica. He sat in the pew beside Emily with his hands folded, and the organ playing, and the light coming through the stained glass in long, colored shafts, and he waited for what had always been there, the quiet interior warmth, the sense of something larger listening, and there was nothing. Not doubt, not anger, an absence, surgical and complete, as though something had reached inside him and removed a specific thing and closed the space neatly behind it. He stared at the altar, and Emily reached over without looking at him and took his hand, and he understood that she already knew, that she had known since the night he walked through the door, and that she had decided to love him through it without requiring him to explain it. He held her hand through the rest of the service and did not bow his head during the prayer, and she did not look at him when he didn't. And that small mercy was one of the greatest acts of love anyone had ever shown him. He spoke for 2 hours into the camera that February morning. He described everything: the descent, the chamber, the creature, the escape, the documents signed under implicit threat, the vehicles that parked outside the house and did not pretend to be anything other than surveillance. He described what he had seen in the images the creature's gaze had put into his mind: ancient Earth, vast winged figures descending, while primitive humans prostrated themselves in terror. Civilizations managed and redirected and occasionally erased across spans of time that made all of recorded history feel like an afternoon. He described losing his faith not as a dramatic rupture, but as a quiet and devastating subtraction. And then, near the end of the recording, he said the thing that he had been building toward since the first word, the thing that had kept him alive past the doctor's estimate, the thing that had finally made the silence no longer bearable. "I spent 7 years believing that what I saw destroyed the possibility of meaning," he said, looking into the camera with the eyes of a man who has set something heavy down after a very long walk. I thought that if something that ancient and that powerful had been managing human history from beneath the ice, then nothing we built meant anything. No love, no sacrifice, no faith, none of it. But I was wrong. I know I was wrong because of this house. Because of Emily, who held my hand in a church when she already knew I had nothing left to pray with. Because of Noah, who noticed his father was afraid of the dark and said so with the kind of honesty that only children have. Whatever exists beneath that ice, whatever shaped the stories we call scripture and legend and myth across 100 civilizations, it could not make what I have in this house.
It could manage history, but it could not manufacture the specific love of one person for another. That is ours. That has always been ours. And if there is a God above whatever I found in Antarctica, that is exactly where he lives. Not in the grand architecture of history, but in the small human spaces that nothing else could ever reach. Daniel Mercer died 11 days later, in the recliner beside the window, in the early morning light, with Emily's hand in both of his, and Noah sitting on the floor with his back against the chair, and Sarah holding her mother's other hand. The oxygen tank was quiet. The February light came through the glass, soft and even, and without judgment. Emily said afterward that in the last minutes he had been very peaceful, and that at the very end he had turned to her and said, simply and clearly, it was worth it. All of it. She uploaded his recording 3 weeks after the funeral, exactly as he had asked. In the comments, from trucks and night shifts and dark bedrooms across the country, from people who understood something about carrying weight in silence and love that endures past understanding, thousands of people wrote the same thing. We heard you, Daniel. We heard you. This story carries deep and lasting educational and human value. It explores military trauma and moral injury with honesty and respect, giving voice to the interior cost of service that veterans rarely speak about publicly. It examines the nature of faith, not as a simple thing to be kept or discarded, but as something living that can be wounded and must be tended. And in doing so, it speaks directly to the experience of millions of older Americans who have wrestled with doubt after loss or suffering. It raises profound philosophical questions about human history, the origins of religion, and the meaning of existence that have occupied serious thinkers across every civilization. And at its deepest level, it argues, through Daniel's final realization, that human love is not a byproduct of history or a construct of forces larger than ourselves. It is the irreducible thing, the thing that remains when everything else is stripped away. That is not entertainment. That is a truth that deserves to be told and heard and remembered.